Joe Biden once said, and I quote, "Don't tell me what you value, show me your budget, and I will tell you what you value." A very good afternoon to one and all present here. It gives me immense pleasure to our director, panelists, faculties, and my dear friends. Today, we are here to gain an insight on the union budget presented by our Honorable Finance Minister, Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman, on the 1st of February 2021. I'd now like to invite our chairman, Professor J. Philip, to address the gathering.
Let the PPT. Students. Students are here.
Now, to present the highlights of the budget, I would like to call upon Shailja Shivangi and Prachi Agarwal of Batch 25.
With the promise of a budget like never before, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman delivered the Union Budget for the financial year 2021 to 2022 on 1st February in a paperless form for the first time. The major allocation this year is in the defense sector, followed by the food and public distribution, home affairs and housing, and urban affairs being the lowest at 54,581 crores. The overall capital expenditure was estimated as rupees 5.54 lakh crores. This year's budget revolves around the philosophy of growth with a human touch. It lays focus on the 6 pillars of reviving the economy, which are as follows: health and well-being, physical and financial capital infrastructure, inclusive development for aspirational India, reinvigorating human capital, innovation and R&D, minimum government and maximum governments. The key areas for discussion today are health and sanitation, education, infrastructure, tax proposals, economy and finance, agriculture and employment. Moving on to the sector-wise highlights for this year's budget. Health and sanitation. India's overall allocation for health and well-being has soared by 137% this year to rupees 2.23 lakh crores compared to the budgeted spending of last year, as the country seeks to boost the capacity of its healthcare system to detect, cure new emerging diseases in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. The budget features a new centrally sponsored initiative called the PM Atmanirbhar Swasth Bharat Yojana, which is an addition to the National Health Mission and has an outlay of 64,180 crores over 6 years. It has also set aside 35,000 crores for production and distribution of the COVID-19 vaccines. In order to better deal with the infectious disease outbreaks, the government plans to set up integrated public health labs, public health units in 11 states, and establish critical care hospital blocks in 602 districts and 12 central institutions. The plan for strengthening the National Center for Disease Control will also include upgrading its 5 regional branches and 20 metropolitan health surveillance units. There will also be an expansion of the Integrated Health Information Portal to all states and union territories to connect all public health labs. Since malnutrition is one of the primary concerns in India, the government has proposed launching an improvised Mission Poshan 2.0 to strengthen nutritional content, delivery, outreach, and outcomes by merging the supplementary nutritional program and the earlier Poshan Abhiyan across 112 aspirational districts. Another focus area is providing clean water, sanitation, and clean environment as a prerequisite to achieving universal health. The Jal Jeevan Mission Urban will be launched with the aim of providing universal water supply in all urban local bodies over 5 years. Education. The budget brings with it good tidings for the education sector. The highlights include setting up a central university in Ladakh, 750 Eklavya model residential schools in tribal areas, and establishing 100 new Sainik schools in partnership with NGOs and other private academies. The budget also aims at strengthening more than 15,000 schools and the national education policy. The National Digital Educational Architecture is to be set up to accelerate the development of digital architecture in the country for implementation of National Education Policy 2020 and address the challenges the institutions are facing in remote learning. A Higher Education Commission is being set up to streamline the higher education scenario of the country. Infrastructure. The government has committed 5.54 lakh crores towards infrastructure development this year. This translates to an increase of 26% from the last year's estimate. This clearly shows the continued commitment and focus on infrastructure as a key enabler for GDP growth going forward. Some of the major highlights are as follows. Highway and road works were announced in Kerala, Tamil Nadu, West Bengal, and Assam. National Rail Plan will be created to bring a future-ready railway system by 2030. 100% electrification of railways will be completed by 2023. Metro services were announced in 27 cities with additional allocations for Kochi Metro, Chennai Metro Phase 2, Bengaluru Metro Phase 2A and B, Nasik and Nagpur metros. The National Hydrogen Mission will be launched to generate hydrogen from green power sources. The gas pipeline project will be set up in Jammu and Kashmir. The Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana will be extended to cover 1 crore more beneficiaries. Recycling capacity of ports will be doubled by 2024. Vehicle scrapping policy will phase out old and unfit vehicles. All personal vehicles will undergo fitness tests in automated fitness centers every 20 years and commercial vehicles every 15 years. National Asset Monetizing Pipeline will be launched to monitor the asset monetization process. Further to be continued by Prachi.
Talking about taxation proposals, senior citizens above 75 years who only have pension and interest income have been exempted from filing income tax returns. The paying bank will deduct the necessary tax on their income. Reopening window for IT assessment cases have been proposed to be reduced from 6 to 3 years. However, in case of serious tax evasion of 50 lakh or more, it can go up to 10 years. Affordable housing projects to get a tax holiday for 1 year. Compliance burden for small trusts whose annual receipts does not exceed rupees 5 crore to be eased. Duty on copper scrap reduced to 2.5% and customs duty on gold and silver to be rationalized. The duty on naphtha has been reduced to 2.5%. The duty on solar inverters has been raised from 5% to 20% and on solar lanterns from 5% to 15% to promote domestic production. All nylon products have been charged with 5% customs duty, and on cotton it has been raised from 0 to 10%. There was a proposal to withdraw exemptions on tunnel boring machines, and it will now attract customs duty of 7.5%. Agriculture infrastructure and development cess has been proposed on certain items, including urea, apples, crude soybean, sunflower oil, crude palm oil, Kabuli chana, and peas. Talking about economy and finance, fiscal deficit stands at 9.5% of the GDP, estimated to be 6.8% in 2021-22. A proposal has been put on table to allow the states to raise the borrowings up to 4% of GSDP in this year. A unified securities market code is to be created, consolidating provisions of the SEBI Act, Depository Act, and two other laws. There has been a proposal to increase FDI limit from 49% to 74% in the insurance sector. An asset reconstruction company will be set up to take over the stressed loans. The deposit insurance has been increased from rupees 1 lakh to rupees 5 lakh for bank depositors. There was a proposal to decriminalize Limited Liability Partnership Act 2008. Two PSU banks and one general insurance firm to be disinvested this year. LIC IPO to debut this fiscal. The strategic sale of BPCL, IDBI Bank, and Air India is to be completed this year. Going further to the agriculture sector, Agriculture Infrastructure Fund to be made available for APMCs for augmenting their infrastructure. 1,000 more mandis to be integrated into the ENAM marketplace. 5 major fishing hubs, including Chennai, Kochi, and Paradeep, to be developed. A multi-purpose seaweed park to be established in Tamil Nadu. Moving on to the employment sector, a portal is to be launched to maintain information on gig workers and construction workers, social security to be extended to gig and platform workers. Margin capital requirement for loans via Stand Up India scheme has been reduced from 25% to 15% for SCs, STs, and women. The first budget of this new decade, and also a digital one, in the backdrop of the unprecedented COVID-19 crisis, has laid a vision for Atmanirbhar Bharat. And this budget is said to be an expression of 130 crore Indians that will further strengthen the Sankalp of Nation First, doubling the farmers' income, strong infrastructure, healthy India, good governance, opportunities for youth, education for all, women empowerment, and inclusive development, among others. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaija and Prachi. I would now request all the dignitaries to take their seats on the dais. I'd now like to invite our chairman, Professor G. Philip, to address the gathering.
Thank you, MC. Ambassador Ravindranathan, distinguished panelists, faculty, and students. Firstly, this is an yearly feature. We have this discussion every year, immediately after the budget. It should have been last week. So when we discuss this issue among us, I said, let's wait for Monday. Somebody asked me why Monday. I said the junior students will be here. We will welcome them with this discussion session. So juniors, welcome to the campus. Give them a mic. Now, you had a very detailed presentation by the two students, I think beautifully done. Made the task for me easier. I thought I'd cover some of it. And of course, the panelists, distinguished panelists, have enough material to comment upon. Now, let me start with something which I read in some of the major newspapers. MIND gave a heading to this budget. FM delivers a booster dose. That paper's comment. Chandrajit Banerjee, who is a DG of CII, described it as a never before budget. I think one of them mentioned that never before budget for never before times. That's a beautiful rhyming one. Never before budget for never before times. The Herald called it road to recovery. And Hindu called it the recovery vehicle. However, this smart young lady from Ambedkar University, Deepa Sinha, described it as a budget that fails to address the hunger pandemic. So she wrote the other pandemic, the hunger pandemic. Now, here is a Dr. Nagaraj from Trivandrum and the Center for Development Studies said, beautiful in many ways, despite some hits, the budget has crucial misses. And so it goes. So we'll hear from the distinguished panelists, their analysis and verdict. And we have a very distinguished panel. Mr. Kamal Bali, Managing Director of Volvo, and our board member, the first time he comes after he became the board member. Welcome, Mr. Bali. Detailed introduction will follow. And yes, on the extreme right, the young man, Mr. Narayan Ramachandran. I call him a biscuit of Bangalore. And you will listen to him and you see who he is. And I'm also so happy to welcome his mother, sitting there, Mrs. Padma Ramachandran. Mrs. Ramachandran was the Chief Secretary of Kerala, and her husband too. So one secretary, the other, Mr. Ramachandran and Mrs. Ramachandran, were the Chief Secretaries of Kerala, and I had privilege of working with both of them on different projects. And Mrs. Padma Ramachandran, she was the best speaker of Chennai. Give her a hand. Now, Mr. Balaji is a senior income tax practitioner, and we introduce in detail. Very quickly getting my introduction, that's what I'm supposed to do. You have heard me quoting Drucker, his famous expression, your resources are outside and your resources are also outside, which he talks about universities, institutions particularly. Your resources are outside, your resources are outside. In the Indian context, I'll tweak it. and say lots of our resources are outside and the results are inside. What do I mean by that? I mean by saying that FDI inflow is crucial to India's development. Now, what we see in the budget is only a part of it. FDI is what made China what it is, Mexico what it is, Korea what it is, and even Malaysia. Let me give you some comparison. FDI in India, FDI in China and India. In 2018, FDI to China was 139 billion, and ours was 42. 19, Chinese FDI was 140 billion, and ours was 49. 2020, Chinese was 163 billion, and ours was 57. You see the difference. We take the last year, 2020, the difference was they had $106 billion more. And that when I converted into, it comes to 8 lakhs crores. You remember the presentation of the student, they said our capital investment is 5.4 lakh crores. And use the difference. In Chinese FDI, the difference between India and China itself is 8 lakhs crores. That's the kind of difference that comes. Now, we are a democratic country, and Western democracies and Japan will happily help us instead of sending their money to China. But what comes in the way, which is very crucial, let's look at some 2 key indices. One, ease of doing business. The other one is corruption index. In ease of doing business, New Zealand is number 1. US is 6. Malaysia is 12. China is 31. India is 63. Ease of doing business. Of course, we get much better than we are somewhere 90 and 120 and all that, but still it is 63 and China is 31. Corruption index, I think in New Zealand or Norway is number 1. US is 25. Malaysia is 57. China is 78. And India in rank is 86. It goes up most corrupt. So starting with Norway, I guess, and we are 86. And these 2 are important in attracting money. People would like to invest where clear, clean, transparent, peaceful, tranquil, that kind of countries. Unfortunately, we are described usually as a place where we shoot on our own foot for no reason. Example, this Kisan agitation, which is going on. Right, wrong, indifferent, I don't know. But I start wondering, why is it cannot be settled? And why should others intervene? And we had several such agitations in the past. Now, other countries who look at investment always look at a tranquil, peaceful, quiet, policy stable, continuous kind of thing. Now, look at some of the things that happened. Adjusted gross revenue, which killed AGR, which killed a number of telcos, and may kill one more soon. Retrospective tax imposition, demonetization, many others. Now, anyone investing in any country would look for a stable, continuing policy. This we had a problem. I had a long quote from Suresh Babu of IIT. I'll skip it. Then we come to employment. In the employment situation, we have 11 to 12 million people entering labor market every year. But we create at best 2.5 million jobs. What happens to 8 or 8.5 million? They are added to the unemployment heap every year. It's a miserable situation. Can we manage it? No, not with our money. We don't have enough money. Third point is whether I want to ask education, which is now known as NEP, National Education Policy, which came with a huge bang, truly revolutionary. Some of the revolutionary changes are they do away with affiliation. Most of you and I studied in affiliated colleges. Now it says it will be done away with. There will only be universities, no standalone institutions like us, nothing of that kind. PGDM will not be there. No single discipline university, only multidisciplinary universities. 15,000 universities will be created in place of the 975 now. But the Mind headline reads like this: education budget is pegged at 93,000 crores, but no separate fund for NEP. Now Kaku Nakate, I'm hearing this name for the first time, but she seems to be a great lady. President and country head of Bank of America described the budget in Mint as big, bold, inclusive, and growth oriented. Look at those words: big, bold, inclusive, and growth oriented. So, respected panelists and moderator, we look forward to your comments on this big, bold, inclusive, and growth oriented budget. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable insights. Now, to begin with, Anisha and I would like to introduce a moderator and panelists for the day. Our first panelist for today, an entrepreneur, an institution builder, and a management guru. This is a rare combination of Professor J. Philip, our chairman. He is another rare combination of serving as senior executive in both private and public sector. Next up, we have a second panelist for the day, Narayan Ramachandran. Narayan Ramachandran is an Indian business person who founded Cluden Ventures and Include Labs Private Limited, and who has also been at the head of 5 different companies. Currently, Mr. Ramachandran occupies the position of Chairman and General Partner at Cluden Management LLC, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer for Cluden I Acquisition Corporation, Co-Chairman of Unitas Capital Private Limited, and Vice Chairman and Managing Director at L Capital Mumbai Advisory Services Private Limited. Mr. Ramachandran is also on the board of 10 other companies. In the past, Mr. Ramachandran held the position of Director at RBL Bank Limited, Head Global Emerging Markets at Morgan Stanley, and Senior Advisor at Morgan Stanley Investment Management Private Limited, Research Director at Rogers Cassie and Associates, Vice Chairman and General Partner at L Capital Singapore Private Limited, Research Associate at Goldman Sachs and Corporation LLC, and Director at Include Labs Private Limited. We welcome you, sir.
Moving on, we have our third panelist for the day, Mr. Kamal Bali. Mr. Kamal Bali is the President and Managing Director of Volvo Group, India. He has been spearheading reputed Indian and multinational organizations as President and CEO for 2 decades now. He is based in Bangalore, is an alumnus of IIT Roorkee, and has an illustrious career spanning 40 years, largely in automotive and engineering industry. Chairman of the Board, Swedish Chamber of Commerce India, SCCI, Independent Director on the Board of the Commercial Entity of Department of Space, Government of India, and past Chairman of CII Karnataka, 2017 to 18, and board member of Zyme as well as a few other premier management institutions. In December 2019, he was knighted and awarded one of the Sweden's highest honors in the Royal Order of the Polar Star by Commander by the Majestics, the Kings and Queens of Sweden, for his untiring support to the Swedish commerce and industry in India. Respected for his values-based leadership and strong ethos, he is also the recipient of the prestigious 2019 Machinist Lifetime Achievement Award by the Times of India Group for his outstanding contribution in the field of manufacturing. We welcome you, sir. Next up, we have our fourth panelist for the day, Mr. K. Balaji. Mr. Balaji completed his schooling from St. Joseph's High School, College, Vijaya College in Bengaluru, and articleship training at Messrs. A.R. Vishwanathan and Corporation. His areas of expertise include corporate audit, corporate taxation, FEMA, and transaction advisory. He was partner in Messrs. A.R. Vishwanathan and Corporation, Chartered Accountants, Bangalore since 2003, and currently partner in Messrs. SSB and Associates, Chartered Accountants, Bangalore. He was visiting faculty at Direct Taxes Regional Training Institute and currently visiting faculty for MCOM at St. Joseph's College of Commerce, Brigade Road, Bengaluru. He was co-opted for Corporate and Allied Law and Corporate Governance Committee of SIRC of ICAI 2011 to 12 and represented school and colleges cricket teams. We welcome you, sir. The discussion is being moderated by Ambassador C.P. Ranganathan, former High Commissioner of India to Australia and Chairman Zyme Kochi. Sir, we request you to begin the session.
Thank you very much. Professor Jayafili, Mr. Narayan Ramachandran, Mr. Kamal Bali, and Mr. Balaji Kujum, Mr. Padma Ramachandran, my colleagues, dear students. This is, of course, the most topical theme at the moment in India, the budget, and what it means for all of us. The budget, I mean, you cannot really have at least too much of a discourse on the budget because it's such a vitally important theme for the nation. It can be analyzed from multiple perspectives. We have already seen the 6 pillars of the budget as stated by the finance minister in the presentation, in the initial, in the introduction made earlier by our students. So that is certainly a perspective one can take of the budget. In addition to that, there are a host of questions one can raise about this budget in terms of what it attempts to do and what it can hopefully do. There is a question of the fiscality. 6.8% budget, fiscal deficit, what does it mean? What are its implications? It is not just this year. I think we seem to have opted for fiscal deficit as a matter of policy for the next 4 years. And what does that mean for the country? It's an expansionary budget, unprecedented in its scale. But maybe in terms of what we need, may not be sufficient because India's needs are enormous. India's ambition is quite high. So is it expansionary enough? And will we achieve what we have envisaged through 5.4 lakh investment contemplated by the budget? Then how far is the budget going to help us in hastening the pace of economic growth, because everything depends on that. We have another 15 years at the most, during which we can confidently enter economic growth. After that, we are going to reach a plateau. And what is going to be the outlook for us? Budget is a very important instrument in ensuring a rate of growth at least 8%. Only if we have a growth of 8% for the next 10 years, our per capita income will double. But then again, remember that even if it doubles, it will only be equivalent to the per capita income of Sri Lanka. So that leads us to another consideration related to the budget. In spite of all these, gigantic figures involved in the budget, lakhs crores of rupees and all that, the fact remains that India is still among the poor countries of the world. How far will the budget act as an instrument to overcome our problems, poverty, economic ills? That's a very important question. Human development, in human development terms, what is it going to contribute? And of course, it is related to the growth target. Our ambition was to be a 5 trillion economy by 2025. Will the budget take us nearer to that professed destination, that aspiration? Very important question. Well, we have here, to address these questions of great moment, we have a panel of high standing and merit. They have already been introduced to the audience. We have the panelists headed by our own chairman, with his perspective as a manager. After all, he keeps saying, and we will all heartily agree with him, that India's problems are basically problems of management. We all know that while our ambitions are high, our execution quite often leaves so much to be desired. That is where management comes. Management at the level of the government, industry, business, services, at the level of the common man. So Professor Philip, I'm sure, would also address the theme from the all-important point of view of the manager. We have Mr. Narayan Ramachandran, chairman of a very interesting, pace-setting investment bank in India, with operations abroad as well. It's a growing organization, and what investment being a very important part of the whole budget exercise, it would be very important for us to know what he thinks of that aspect of the budget. And then we have Mr. Kamal Bali, representing in himself the manufacturing industry of India, where we have proposed a great course as that being an accelerator of India's development in the years to come. How far does the budget help us in achieving the high level of ambition we have in the manufacturing sector? Enlarge the contribution of industry to the GDP. After all, that is the first step you take in the transition from a developing country to a developed country. Shift more and more people to industry and from agriculture. So how far this budget is a step in that direction, medium and long term. And then we have Mr. Balaji Kunjam, partner of a firm of chartered accountants and tax consultants. He will be looking at aspects of the budget relating to taxes and the rest. So we can be confident that this panel will address these questions, these wide-ranging questions, and we will be the great beneficiaries of their presentations, which will follow. Thank you so much. Let me extend on my part, let me extend a hearty welcome to the panelists. We have 40 minutes, and each of them will speak for 10 minutes on different aspects of the budget. And our great pleasure in welcoming as the first speaker, Chairman of XIME, Professor James Hill. In that case, we will have more time from our panelists. We will begin with Mr. Narayan Ramachandran, Chairman, Unitas Capital.
Thank you very much. Very nice to see all of you. My personal welcome to the juniors, I guess you call them, or the people who have come here for the first time. So welcome to this session. Before I even begin, I'm going to say, I'm not going to talk about the budget. I'm going to talk about context. And I think that's the most important thing to remember when you analyze anything, but most particularly when you analyze an Indian budget. Because Indian budget has sort of the theater of cricket combined with Bollywood at the same time. So you can imagine the kind of hoopla we have relative to the budget. But in all of that analysis, most people forget what the size of the budget is, what its real purpose is, how it follows previous budgets, and so on. So you heard lots of numbers. I mean, some people are sitting there calculating exactly how many zeros are there in 1 lakh crores, you know. So there's this tendency to sort of assume that everybody knows everything about everything. And what does really an expansionary budget even really mean? So the first thing I will tell you is you must become good students of economic history. And for that, I will say you need to be both students of economics and students of history. Economic is at least contemporary Indian economics, which is when did budgets really start? Because we've already spoken about a never before 100-year-old budget. It's not entirely clear to me whether we had budgets before 1947 and what way. We certainly had budgets in British India, but not in the same way that we have now, and so on. So you need to place that in context. So that's the first sort of contemporary history thing. Then maybe I can get a show of hands. How many of you think this is among the top 5 budgets? And I'm just going to ask for a year other than 91, where there was another good budget. So let's start with that question. A year other than 91, whether there was a good budget. We will not, we will leave it as a semantic term. Okay, I got one hand. 2004 was actually not the second half of the Vajpayee government, it was the end of the Vajpayee government. So it would have been earlier, but there were several good budgets in the Vajpayee government. We can come back to why. So economics and history, just be careful. 2004 May was the actual transition after India shining to the next government, which was Sonia Gandhi's UPA one. Okay, so any other guesses? So nobody's heard of the dream budget of 97-98. The budget of 91 itself. By the way, what prompted the budget of 1991? Sorry, I don't know whether I'm allowed to do this as a panelist, last questions, but what prompted 1991? Again, one quick answer. Go ahead. Okay, great. Balance of payments crisis. So all of your homework, particularly the juniors, is to figure out what balance of payments is. And not just at the superficial level, but at each underlying level. Professor Philip already mentioned FDI. Essentially, FDI makes it to India through the balance of payments. There is another mega component, 2 mega components in that. One is diaspora remittances. Professor Philip and I come from, and Professor Ravindranath come from Kerala, which is one of the biggest remittance states in India. So there's approximately $80 billion of remittances in India. India is the largest single country for remittances in the world. So that's a very, very important component. And most times it works and sometimes it fails. It failed spectacularly in 1991. but has held up since for a very long time. So that's the second component of balance of payments that you should pay attention to. And the third big balance of payments component is, of course, oil. So homework for you is figure out the balance of payments, because it's extremely critical for balance of payments issues, particularly for emerging markets, in triggering the political economy that permits dream budgets. So while the pandemic is a crisis, as some great man once said, you don't let a good crisis go to waste. And the question is whether or not we have done that in this budget. So I'll get to the topic of this budget at hand. I will let you guys go deal with economic history, but it is extremely important to connect those dots, because again, as some wise people said, ordinary managerial competence is connecting dots that everyone can see. Innovation is connecting dots that others don't see, and genius is connecting dots that are not there. So I will hope that some among you will aspire to the genius level and connect dots that are not there. That's the most important thing about budgets, about any sort of reform process, because we're starting to do things well outside the budget cycle. So for instance, two major reforms in both NDA 1, NDA 2 and NDA 3 have been the GST reform and the reform around bankruptcy. Both have taken place outside the context of budgets through another influencing mechanism we use quite widely in India, which is a commission approach. So for instance, the Vishwanathan Committee report was the one that actually gave fillip to the bankruptcy reform, and similarly, GST has now been discussed first beginning in the Vajpayee administration in NDA 1.0, subsequently consummated nearly 17 years later in the GST, including the constitutional amendments that were required. So India as a democracy requires these threads. Of course, you have to analyze whether the threads themselves are changing, and I'll point to that in for a second. So I will analyze the budget in the following way. First, like any communication device, and ultimately, certainly the budget speech, but even the budget is a communication device. So how good was the storytelling? By the way, I don't know how many of you have downloaded the app, since you're all of the app generation. Anybody downloaded the budget app? Okay, so including the people who presented the thing itself, please download the app. It's a top, we ranked India on many criteria, and unfortunately they were low. But in terms of the budget app, I would venture to say top decile, for sure. It's actually a first-class app. Now we can debate the numbers in there, but the presentation and data visualization is absolutely first class. You can download it, and again, a first for a government app in either iOS or Android. So that itself is a first in itself and speaks a lot about what this government wants to do, which is communicate through digital apps. So last couple of years, we started the app route of downloading stuff. Now, some of us analysts have a quibble that they've gone entirely to PDF. We cannot do, sort of other methods of data extraction from a PDF as easily. But that's a little quibble from analysts, but the actual presentation is outstanding. So from a storytelling point of view, it was very short relative to Nirmala Sitharaman. The last time that it happened, I don't know how many of you remember. Unfortunately, she actually fainted while giving the speech because it was that long. So luckily it was shorter, so much more easy to receive. So somewhat like Indian movies, we have gone from roughly 3.5 hours to roughly 1.5 hours. So it's a good thing. Second thing is it was quite to the point, and some of the controversial elements were only in the budget documents, were not actually spoken about. So there wasn't as much heckling in Parliament as you might otherwise expect. The app itself was excellent, and the data visualization and the presentation was very good. So storytelling marks very, very high. Ideology. There has been an ideological shift, but in order to fully appreciate this, you need a full sense of both contemporary economic history of India as well as sort of what all of these terms mean. So we won't go through that entirely in this presentation, but let me just tell you that most of these budgets that we have had in India is, you can think of it as Nehru plus minus, including NDA 1.0, NDA 2.0, etc. So we have just essentially moved the needle a little bit this way, that way, when our backs have been absolutely to the wall, like the balance of payments crisis of 91, and sort of the continuing events in 97, 98, and then the infrastructure reforms under Vajpayee. We've done a little bit more, but by and large, these would be called where is effectively any amount of expenditure that we could raise was spent on consumption, either government consumption or otherwise. But very little actually went on, except in the very initial years, for investment. So ideologically, you heard the number before, but to put the number in context, the 5.54 lakhs, 5.5 or 5.4 lakh crores that was allocated to investment, coming on the back of a similar sort of 4-ish amount last year, is the largest allocation to government investment in recent 2-year memory. And that is an ideological shift for anyone, leave alone the NDA, it's certainly an ideological shift from everything we've done in the last 2 decades, if not more. So that's an important signal. And one way to think about this budget is it is oriented towards catalyzing government investment, which then hopefully catalyzes private investment. Now, the usual economics logic for this would be that if government steps up its investment, it crowds out the private sector. So this term is another economic term that some of you may have heard, but don't think of it so literally like that. Yes, in the bond market, it will be that the government will crowd out the private sector. However, the confidence signaling by the government can be extremely useful, and the private sector, as we have seen through the new geo-financing and others, is rather creative in the ways it finances. And therefore, if there is a positive signal on the economy and in the general direction of reform that the government can signal through approaches such as the one on government investment, that can have a very positive knock-on effect on private investment. So, in the literal sense of the term, it crowds out private investment, but in a much broader sense, I actually think it helps, and it signifies a rather major ideological shift in Indian budget history, Indian economic reform history, one might add. Beyond that, I don't think any of the terms that Professor Philip used as referencing Kaku, who I know very well from Merrill Lynch, it's Indian corporate sector essentially uses superlatives, particularly when it's relative to the budget, because the next morning they have to be either a North Block or South Block, and therefore they don't want to be questioned. They also have to write a Twitter feed at least 3 times a day, and therefore it's easier to say nice things rather than critique. So I would say forums such as this should actually organize budgets on critique, and critique should be solidly based, not based on what is called oppositionism in India, which is because you're saying it, I'm against it. Don't worry about the messenger. Worry about the message and critique the message, both as a positive and a negative. I would say that. And unfortunately, most people, we have oppositionism in India. So if you look at the next day's paper, as I'm sure several of you did, all the Congress and AAP members were essentially speaking against the budget. All the BJP and sycophants were speaking for the budget. There were very, very few objective voices that were saying this and that. So please listen to those objective voices where you can, make up your own mind, and if only for the analytical challenge of it, critique it for what it's worth. Now, coming to the budget proposals itself, I found it sadly lacked coherence. So other than this ideological shift towards government investment, there was no unifying framework. There is no sort of path forward. It's not covered by any single cogent argument. There was a little drip and a little drab here and there. Some of them were good. So, for instance, the vehicle scrappage policy was very good, but the vehicle scrappage policy was not framed, and maybe we can get Mr. Bali to speak about it, was not framed in the context of any EV policy or a non-dependence on oil or a better BOP because we are less dependent. None of that. It was just vehicle scrappage policy because some lobby group had probably met them. They picked up that one little thing and dropped it into the budget. Good thing nonetheless, but no umbrella to fit it under that. So several such policies, including, for instance, what happened in the banking sector. The banking sector in India went from being in the general ward to the ICU approximately 2 years ago. And we are now, 700 days and counting on the ventilator. And we're getting, again, dribs and drabs of money into the banking sector. So 20,000 crores, which is, minuscule in the scheme of the Indian banking sector. We need $150 billion for getting out of the NPA hole prior to COVID. So if I add COVID in, let's just, add another $25 billion to that hole. along with Basel III, this is a very, very serious number, which can only be bridged in part by FDI, in part by clever financing of the type that Geo has done. So India can do it if it chooses, but we are not being bold. We are certainly not being imaginative in our solutions. If a private company that claims to represent some growth in India can do it, I think certainly the government of India can be much more imaginative in the way it finances some of these things. Today, it's difficult to finance it entirely in India, but the way to do that is you borrow that money from abroad in a variety of ways, both equity and fixed income, and then you return it when you actually get to a different stage of growth than you are in. India is a sufficiently growth-oriented country that we don't need to be paranoid about fiscal deficit. That's recognized well in this budget, which is why we allowed ourselves to go away from a fiscal rule that was set again in Vajpayee government, for those of you who don't know. That rule was never met, but was approximately met only once in 2007-8. Subsequently, we've always flouted that rule. We've been sort of saying, we'll get there. It's a little bit like weight management. It's always a little distant than you believe it is. And now we're so far from it. This year, we will probably be at a combined state and federal fiscal deficit that is probably close to 15%, which is among the highest that we've ever had in India, even in the worst years in 2001, for instance. So there are problems that we have to face, and only dramatic sort of positive steps will get us there. We have, I would say, in summary, partially used this crisis to mark an important ideological shift towards government investment and away from government consumption. We've also marked it positively because last year's budget was a mega exercise in obfuscation. That obfuscation has now luckily been behind us. We've actually sort of said the number 9.5, 9.8 is out there, next year 6.8, and so on. So at least we're doing a little bit more of that. But at least the data cannot belong to any party. The data should belong to all of us. The inferences can belong to everyone, to each party. You can certainly infer from the data what you choose to infer. That is what a political democracy is all about. But if you imbue the data itself with politicism, then you have no idea what you're talking about. So if we don't know inflation, if we don't know growth, if we don't know the balance of payments accurately, then best guess is we start to be like China, which is we're permanently growing at 8%, whether it's 2 or 10. That doesn't help anybody, certainly doesn't help a democracy either critique, analyze, or improve upon a budget that has been delivered. So I would encourage all of you to look at it with a critical eye. I don't mean negative eye, I mean actually critical eye, which is analyze the positive, analyze the negatives, make up your mind as you go along. I would say in summary that this budget marks only one important thing, that is towards investments. Many of the little proposals are good, but it doesn't add up to one cogent, cohesive idea. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a very enlightening tour d'horizon of the budget, and I'm thankful to Mr. Narayan for that. Now the next plan.
Now the next panelist to speak is Mr. Kamal Bali, President and Managing Director of Volvo Group.
Good evening, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. I think Mr. Narayan Ramachandran has very eloquently articulated the macroeconomic and historical aspects and the context of this budget. Thank you very much for that very well articulated commentary on this thing. So a lot of stuff, in fact, he's made my job a lot easy. I have to do much less talking now. We can probably discuss a little more during the Q&As. But just coming very, very quickly to this budget in particular, I think over the last few years, the relative importance of union budgets has gone down as various important decisions such as changing the corporate tax rates, launch of PLI scheme, so many other fiscal and other measures have been done outside the budget. So budget and almost all the indirect tax things like GST and other things doesn't happen within the budget. So budget has more of a policy direction to my mind and an ideological direction as Mr. Ramachandran quite rightly brought out. So, and very frankly, over the last 20-25 years, I have found budgets predominantly more of the same, with very little difference here and there, just tinkering with something. To that extent, I must say this year's budget is very, very significant. It's a huge departure from working capital mode to project mode. I think that is a very, very main departure to which Mr. Ramachandran also alluded to, moving from revenue kind of an expenditure and focusing a lot on capital expenditure. To that extent, I think a very, very major departure. To that extent, I would say it's a very bold, audacious budget, which will actually, it's also very refreshing to see how this FM has taken things on in a very, very positive way. So, we have seen that the government over this last 12 to 18 months or 12 months has done the heavy lifting for the country, whether it was the liquidity through Reserve Bank of India or the fiscal stimulus or the monetary policies through RBI. They have done the heavy lifting, and rightfully so, because it was very difficult to get the private investment in, because private investment is part of a virtuous cycle. You have demand, you have more consumption, therefore you will have more demand, you will therefore need more capacity, therefore you will get more investments, and then you invest more, then the virtuous cycle kickstarts. So this has been lacking for the last several years. The virtuous cycle, the private investment was lacking. So government had to do heavy lifting for some time. But the interesting part here is, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, which you must understand, to which I think Mr. Ramachandran also alluded, I'll take it a little more in detail. This 5.5 lakh crore, while the government would be spending almost the same overall amount in FY21 and FY22, it's probably only 1 percentage point higher than last year. But they would be spending 26% more when it comes to capital investments in creating infrastructure. So which is about 2.5% of our GDP. Now typically this kind of investment, if done rightfully, will actually give a multiplier effect of 2.5. 2.5 means if it is 2.5% of the budget GDP, this will lead to 6.25% growth in the long run. This itself will be 6.25% of your GDP. The growth will come on account of that. So I think this is one very, very major point you must understand why this budget is different from the past budgets, because a lot of focus on investments in infrastructure and the right areas, health, education, ports, roads, railways. I think this is, to me, the startling point of this budget. And what they have done is, basically, if I have to say in a few words, they've actually unleashed the fiscal power to prime growth by doing two things, by undertaking divestment. Now, where will the money come from? While fiscal deficit is increased, that's one. The other is the money is going to come from in divestment and asset monetization. Now, this is a very bold step the government has taken. How this money is going to be raised? A, partly through divestment and asset monetization, they're talking of 1.75 lakh crore. And B, going through a glide path of fiscal deficit, going from 9.5 to 4.5, not tomorrow, but over a period of 4 to 5 years. So the money is getting generated through this and going to be spent in capital formation and not for paying for pensions and other things, which only leads to consumption for that year. But this capital investment will lead to consumption and growth. So to my mind, it's a great budget. Of course, it has a number of challenges. Let me very quickly come to some of the challenges. This budget will actually test the management prowess of the government. Management in terms of execution. If we fail in execution, this budget is as good or as bad as any. Seeing the way the farmer protests are not being managed in the way they could have been, I am little worried on how will they manage when the divestment and asset monetization starts, when public sector banks are going to be privatized, when BEML, IOCL, Container Corporation of India are going to be privatized. How are you going to handle those agitations? How will you manage the political opposition to some of these crucial issues? So this is one big caveat in this budget, that the success of this budget will depend on A, smartness and management execution capabilities, B, how do you manage the political opposition to the various elements of this budget. So these are my two important points which I wanted to share. So to that extent, therefore, it's very, very important to look at the budget from that lens. The second thing which I wanted to talk about was the great thing in this budget is manufacturing. Now, this is something which I have probably spoken earlier and probably my favorite subject. I mean, I want to really remind you all that the world does a manufacturing output of about $14 trillion. $14 trillion all put together is the manufacturing output, of which China is 30%. Okay? And India is 3%, and the US is about 17%. Between US and China, they account for almost 50% of the manufacturing output. So now, there is a huge rebalancing of global value chains happening as a consequence of this pandemic. So this pandemic actually, for India, is a great opportunity. It's actually not a negative. Unfortunately, we have lost some lives, but other than that, this pandemic is bringing more opportunities than challenges for India. We have managed this pandemic pretty well, but actually it is throwing up so many opportunities. This rebalancing of almost $4 trillion of manufacturing output from China to other countries, it could be India, it could be Vietnam. It's not going to come so easily to you. You will have to compete for it. There is Mexico, there is Vietnam, there are so many other suitors as well for this. So, but the pace at which this $4 trillion is shifting away from China to other countries, you could not have imagined overnight in the next 10 years. So this COVID-19 has given you that opportunity. And India has to now really pull up its socks to ensure that ease of doing business, cost of doing business is really on ground, really what we say. And we need to really break those barriers there. So I think that's something very good. And the PLI policy which government has done, seeing that, and I know for sure that a lot of investments are already coming in. Lots of companies are already shifting into India. India is one of the major recipients, and I think therefore, if you look at some of the budget, I would say budget or pre-budget initiatives of the government, like the Mitra arrangement, which is the 7 textile parks which are happening. The PLI got 2 lakh crores to manufacturing sector is on account of that, matching what China gives to some of the manufacturing houses there. So I think that's something very interesting. So this is really pushing. So manufacturing is another multiplier effect, unlike services. I have talked about investments in infrastructure. Manufacturing also has a multiplier effect on upstream and downstream. If I make more vehicles, the steel industry, the cement industry does better, and that's upstream. Downstream, the financial sector, the insurance sector, the financial services sector does well. So manufacturing again is very, very important. The government has focused rightfully on that. They're putting in money at the right place. So I think that's another very important thing. Vehicle scrappage policy was talked about. We have been talking to the government for last about 3 years on vehicle scrappage policy. We have finally come to a conclusion. And why this vehicle scrappage policy was discussed? A, it is to reduce pollution, emissions. I think that's something very critical. The first important reason for this is to get state-of-the-art vehicles, reduce emissions, pollution on the roads, and so that you can have better vehicles. Power to weight ratios of old vehicles are very, very horrible, I would say. That's why you see on a highway the trucks are moving at a snail's speed, they can't even carry the full load. So all that has changed over the last few years with the new set of vehicles which are coming in. So that's another very important thing. And obviously, if you scrap vehicles, private vehicles beyond 20 years and public vehicles beyond 15 years through a scientific scrappage. So this scrappage is not going to be you scrap a vehicle. You scrap a vehicle, but we will recover much more value from the vehicle by recycling some of the parts. Steel, rubber, glass, a lot of things, these things will be recycled and will be used. So there will be several recycling centers in the country. So it's going to take 1 year. Vehicle scrappage policy will come into effect, not now, it will come into effect from April 2022. So that's the time it will take, which is perfect. And I think that will have the twin effect of really getting latest technology in, raising a war on pollution, and getting automotive industry to really pump prime their growth. So I think overall, a great budget. We are pretty happy as industry. As Mr. Ramachandran rightly said, let's look at the real intent of the budget and the real numbers and the purpose of the budget, and then provide our commentary accordingly. So, boys and girls, you have great opportunity. I think, to my mind, this decade will belong to India. 2020 and boys and girls who are passing out in 2021 and 2022 will have opportunities like never before. The industry would be booming, and you will, in fact, we cannot meet demand already on construction equipment. That's the way the demand is highest ever. We are already peaking in construction equipment, on equipment for roads and all. So it's great more times for you all. Wish you all the best. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Kamal Bali is, in the course of his presentation, and thrown up some very interesting points on which now the emphasis given to infrastructure is certainly a key aspect of this budget. In China, it is the vast expenditure, the vast investment in infrastructure projects in the 1990s, especially the late 1990s, which
it was the vast scale of investment in infrastructure in China in the late 90s, which accelerated economic growth in that country. We should hope for the same. But of course, there is this proviso that when it comes to execution, our record has not been all that splendid. We have any number of examples around this, the progress of Bangalore Metro and projects like that. We should hope that there will be much more speed in the execution of infrastructure projects. By the nature of things, investment in infrastructure takes time. So sooner these are executed, the better for the economy. Of course, manufacturing industry is another story. There, the employment generation is immediate, and it depends greatly on the private sector. We could assume that drawing momentum from the infrastructure investment, private sector will play its part, as Mr. Kamal Bali indicated, and the wholesome effect will start beginning to be felt very soon. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Bali, for your enlightening presentation. Now, I have great pleasure in inviting Mr. Balaji Kanjan to speak.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Mr. Philip, Mr. Ravindra Nathul, Mr. Narayan Ramachandran, and Mr. Kamal Bali. And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. See, the thing is, in India, as a chartered accountant, I am practicing since 22 years, and since my core area is corporate, so the business side in the last 22 years, what I've seen is the business side of it. So whatever we talk about on the budget, see, every year the budgets are coming, it is going on. But the main important thing which the other panelists also just highlighting, that post 1991, so when we have in 1991, since we had a major crisis, so that was the reason why the economy was opened up, and thereafter the FDI flow started coming in, and we have seen in the past about 25 to 30 years how the country has grown. But always there was a need for big bang reforms. So every time the budget used to come, as you know that UPA and NDA, these were the two groups of parties where we saw in the last 20 years, presented the budget. But whenever the budgets were presented, the main crux was they used to present, and as usual, the ruling party used to say that this budget is watershed budget, all kinds of things they used to say. But at the end of the day, what happens, that is the government's implementation and also how the economy performs, considering the domestic and the international environment, is very important. So if you see in the current scenario, as you know that when FM was coming in CNBC in the past about a month or so, she was telling that this budget will be a most remembered budget in the 100 years. So possibly that may be 100 years back and possibly 100 years from now on. But if you see the budget 100 years back, many of them, they were asking why this 100 years? See, if you go through the Income Tax Act, since I am a little bit of taxman, so if you go through the Income Tax Act, we had the 1961 Act, which is still in vogue, and earlier to that we had the 1922 Act. So what I was thinking when I just searched the web, so the thing what I could able to find is, other than this 1922 Act, I did not find much about the budget. So probably I feel that from that 1922 to 21, it is nearly 100 years. So that may be the intention of the FM telling about this 100 years. Okay, coming back to the current budget. See, as you are aware, that when the pandemic started, so throughout the world, there was a lot of shivers, whether it's a developing country or a developed country. And initially, the way people started reacting to the economy is mind-boggling. See, if you see the best example of the pandemic, why I am talking about little bit of pandemic is that is very important in order to talk about the current budget. See, in March when the pandemic happened and the lockdown was announced, you could have just seen what happened to the stock markets. The stock market fell to nearly, if you take the BSE, I think it fell to nearly 25 or 26,000 points. Okay, from there on, today it has crossed more than 50,000. Today I think it is 50,150. So this sensitivity of people from March to till now, you can see how the mindset keeps on changing. And if you see today, all major economies still, they are not come out of the pandemic. But if you see in India, in spite of having 130 crores of population, today we are able to bend the pandemic and we are moving around, nearly normal. So that itself, in a way, we have overcome the pandemic. But the bigger challenge for the government in this particular budget was, since the economy was suddenly given a break during the pandemic, the government, as everybody knows, that a lot of people lost their jobs, businesses collapsed, a lot of businesses still, they are not commenced. If you take the travel sector, tourism sector, it is seriously affected, isn't it? And apart from that, the MSMEs. See, some of the MSMEs which are actually lifeblood. Like for example, the day-to-day activities wherever the MSMEs are supporting, those MSMEs are not suffered much. But some of the MSMEs which are not supporting the day-to-day activities, in those cases, they have seriously are in crisis even today. If you go through any travel agent today, you will find that there will not be much people who are working in a travel agency business or any other kind of business. I mean, travel industry, I mean, ruthlessly, the entire sector is collapsed as of today. You can see Thomas Cook and all the other companies which are completely, I mean, they're completely on the flat. They're still not raising to their normal levels. So with this crisis and also the MSME sector which is seriously facing the financial burden because either the working capital is not matching and because of the pandemic, the money which was supposed to come, the recovery process of all these MSMEs, it struggled a lot. So the government had a very serious crisis and also they had a very serious challenge how to reboot the economy, which is very, very important. So during the pandemic, there were a lot of challenges. I think the government has really worked hard and finally, due to the pandemic, they had really given a budget, which is a big bang budget, hopefully, because a lot of bold reforms, they have taken it up in this particular budget. And the thing is, only when these materializes, then only this budget will be remembered for the next 100 years. So the main thing which I wanted to highlight today is in all these years, if you see, the health sector was given very less prominence in every budget. But however, each and every successive budget started increasing the budget for the health sector. But this budget, I think it has earmarked a lot of amount for the health sector because the government, they could able to realize the impact of pandemic and because ours is a very huge population, we cannot able to take impact on the health issues. And apart from that, the defense and infra is very, very important to us. It's a defense sector, unless otherwise we are powerful, we are nowhere. So defense is very, very important and apart from that, infrastructure. For any economy, if it has to raise to a big economy and if somebody has to look upon us and also to a population of 130 crores, without infrastructure, we cannot able to reach the $5 trillion economy. See, as of today, if you see, ours is a $2 trillion economy and if we have to reach the 5 trillion, I think we have to, as a country, it is not the duty of the government alone to raise to the occasion. It is each and every citizen of this country to raise to the occasion. It's not only the businessman, it's not only the industrialist, it's not in the agriculturist, it is the student, everybody. We have to raise to the occasion. Then only it is possible. Otherwise, this will be another budget. Other than it, it is nothing. See, the budgets will come and go, and apart from that, the policy initiative, whatever they take, in the ground, we can only make it happen, or we cannot make it happen. So that is the thing we are into. And apart from that, India, if you see, it's the most complicated country. So we have 130 crores, we have 30 plus states, and you know how the country is diversified. Okay, for every small decision, there will be a hue and cry. Either it may be political or non-political. So such is the situation, and it is not so easy like you make one policy and the policy will be automatically implemented. So if you compare China to India, if you take in 90s, where they were literally nearly to us, and today they are somewhere, probably 3 to 6 times more than Indian economy. Why this is happening? The simple reason is there the policies once they have taken, whether it is good or bad, it will be implemented because the government, whatever it takes, it is the rule of law, and they will take it whatever may be the situation. But in India, because it's a democratic country, we have to follow lots of things, rules, regulations, constitution, everything. So we have to see the political environment, social environment, economical environment, business environment, everything. So with all this, I think achieving 5 trillion is a real challenge. I think the biggest thing is optimism and patience, which is the need of the hour. Only when we are optimistic and only when we are patient, we can able to reach that achieving that $5 trillion economy. But having said that, in this budget, few things are very important. One is the government has identified few trust areas where they have earmarked more funds, and that the important thing, as I earlier also I have mentioned, that is the infrastructure, defense, and also the Jal Jeevan mission, which they have taken up in a big way, because water is very important. So for all this funds, money is very important, and government for the first time have realized that the government also have to allow more borrowers, so then only it is possible. So government has taken a bold decision to borrow funds in order to reboot the economy and also to kickstart and also to ensure that money flows everywhere and the economy flourishes, and by that way the common man can able to benefit. So if you go through the compliance aspect, that is the good governance. If you see the 6 pillars of this budget, one important thing is minimum government, maximum government, maximum governance. So there, the thing is, India today, it is suffering because of the bureaucracy. See what, since I am in the practice, I know how much of difficulty we face in complying the laws. See, whatever they are telling about, sir was telling, I mean, and also it is come out in papers that ease of doing business, we are in 63. But the real issue is, even today, there are problems. We might be filing returns on an e-filing mode, but the amount of problems which we are facing, that we only know. So the thing is, everywhere there are challenges, but we have to make it happen. If you see the GST, initially how much problems we face, many of the chartered accountants, they have worked day and night because they have to file the returns and it was not uploading. So there was a lot of technical issues. So today, if you see, everything is getting settled. Why it could have, we could able to make it happen? That is because of the patience and perseverance. Otherwise, if we say it is not possible, today we could not have achieved so much. So the thing is, this budget has come, it has given something, and it is our duty to ensure that we should able to make it happen. And another thing which I wanted to tell you is that the MSME sector, which is very seriously affected during this pandemic. So the government wanted to give more benefits to the MSME sector and also to the startup. So that is the reason why, if you go through the tax proposals, in lot of areas they have extended the tax benefits to the MSME sector and startup for another 1 year. So by giving this, I think they have given a little bit of reprieve to these industries, and also they have given a lot of scope for funding the MSMEs, so that the MSMEs can able to get working capital requirements and also capex at a very nominal cost. At the same time, they have simplified certain things so that raising of capital for both working capital and for capex are made easier. So with this budget, I think the next 1 year, we can overcome all the adversities which we saw in the last 1 year, and hopefully the budget what we are seeing, we will see a reality that we will achieve the $5 trillion by 2024 or 2025. With this brief, I'm closing my remarks. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Balaji Kunjam has thrown light on some of the areas of the budget which need priority attention. And well, I think he did right by emphasizing the role of MSEs. There's a view that not enough has been done for the MSE sector under the budget. That point is certainly part of the debate. And then, of course, there is the fact that the Indian system is not, does not lend itself to easy execution of policies and measures such as those contemplated by the budget and other economic policies. Of course, there is China's example, which is in striking contrast to India. But then we need not take China as the only country with which we could be compared in terms of efficacy of government measures and the standard of execution. How about the Southeast Asian countries? They have managed to combine a fair measure of democracy with efficient execution. And basics like education, health, and nutrition, and governance. Why can't, of course, they are, compared to us, they are small, but their example is a celebrated example. They are the newly emerging countries. Apart from those in East Asia like Taiwan and Hong Kong, the Southeast Asian countries, even a country like Thailand, if you go there, you see the impressive progress they have made in manufacturing. Things were never associated with Thailand, not to speak of Malaysia and Singapore. So there are around, and even Bangladesh, look at that. In the employment generation sector like ready-made garments, we were supposed to be the beneficiaries of the abolition of the multi-fiber agreement with effect from 2004. But it turned out that the real address was Bangladesh. They were the ones who benefited. And see the perceptible change it has brought to Bangladesh economy. From the good performance of the ready-made garment sector, other sectors of Bangladesh are beginning to benefit from the changes. That is the sort of effect we should have had in much larger measure in India because of our formidable background in textiles. But that didn't happen. So these are areas where we need a lot of attention in the short-term future, while investment in infrastructure and such other areas as indicated in the budget will make their own favorable impact on GDP in the years to come. Well, we now have 15 minutes for the question and answer session, and I expect that there will be a whole lot of questions. We will, of course, need to limit it to 15 minutes. So may I invite questions from the floor on any aspect of the presentations made by our panelists?
Good evening, respected panelists. I'm Shruti Kansal. So my question is for Narayan sir. So in the budget, there have been a few proposals affecting the alternate investment in the market as such, right? Like exemption on dividend paid out to REITs, and then debt financing being permitted to FPI in the REITs and in WIPs. So how much of this, like how effective do you think these would be in pushing up the VC and PE deal volumes, which did see a dip in 2020, I believe?
Yeah, again, my exhortation to all of you would be to take it as a multi-year, multi-aspect package. Don't try to take one little thing and see if it will move the markets. It's not possible. I mean, for instance, we've done this. Like with many other things, we have done change to permanent establishment laws some 7-8 years ago. But like many things, we have done 80% of it. So people are still sitting outside India. You talk about a ring, China talks about a string of pearls. We have to talk about a ring of venture capital managers sitting outside India. Because they can't come to India. The day they come to India, it will be declared permanent establishment and the tax will reach to Canada and the US and other owners of capital, which they will simply refuse to do. So I think it needs much more sort of cogent, comprehensive reform. Somebody needs to say, we need to get them here. Here are the 7 things. But the challenge is that our method of approaching government is through specific lobby submissions, usually just around the budget, maybe 2-3 months before the budget. And it's not